All right, hey there, mindful travelers, and welcome to another episode of The Caring Traveler, a show where we shed light on the good in the world by sharing stories of people who do more than travel. These caring and selfless humans strive to change the world one nameless stranger at a time through conscious action wherever they happen to find themselves in the world. Now, I am pleased to welcome Astrid and Clint today. So Astrid is a writer and blogger with a passion for new places and cultures, while Clint is a front-end developer doing some awesome software stuff with a banking app that you just told me about. I know the reason I had these two here, I'm so excited, is they are world schoolers, just like my family. They have been traveling for, I believe it was, what was it, 4 years that you went to 11 countries, and you have been featured on CNN Travel. And I know I mentioned in my other channel, Story Unfolding, I had Astrid there talking about this brand new book that she just unveiled, and we'll mention it later in the show. But I mentioned that she is one of the most high profile people that I've had on my show with her Wandering Daughter site and everything so far. So I think that stands true in this channel too. This is a pretty new channel. So welcome, Astrid and Clint. Please tell us about yourself. Thanks for coming.
Thank you. So yeah, I'm a writer and at the Wandering Daughter. I also work full-time for a nonprofit organization based in the US as well. And just been traveling for 4 years with my family.
Yeah, and I'm Clint, and I am a software engineer. Work for a bank based here in the United States, but been working remote for the last 4 years. Yeah, that's pretty much what I do. I'm graphic designer on the side, which leads to one of our side things that we do.
Yeah.
But yeah.
And we have two kids. One is 11 and the other is 8. And we started traveling with them when they just turned, what was it, 8?
Julian was just turning
8 and
5, I think. So it's been a while. Yep.
Okay. And where are you located right now?
We're actually in Seattle metro area. So
okay, was that where you guys were before you started traveling?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, so what gave you that kick and, what got you out the door? What made you start traveling?
Oh my gosh. So it was like we were both working full time for companies and commuting to work at least an hour a day, probably more, dropping our kids off at school for like 10 hours, school and daycare for like 10 hours a day. And we happened to go to this family travel conference in Canada and met a lot of other traveling families who were traveling full time and also working remotely, and basically started talking to them and was inspired by those families to like go out and do it.
Yeah, basically, we had just bought a house a year and a half earlier. We kind of put off any sort of long-term travel ideas, and we went to this conference, and basically everyone we spoke to and befriended basically said, that's not a reason. Like every justification we had for why we couldn't travel at that moment, they would say, but that's not really a reason, and here's why. And so it's about a 5-hour drive from where the conference was back to Seattle. We literally on that drive home, like convinced ourselves that we were going to start traveling full time.
Yeah, and then 9 months later we left.
Mm-hmm.
Oh wow, that's awesome. So what did you do with the brand new house?
We put it up for rent. We still own it. It's currently being full-time rented. And so we weren't ready to let go of that. We love the house actually. So we were like, no, we don't want to lose that.
Yeah.
Plus in the Seattle market, if you have a house in the Seattle market, it's a pretty good idea to try to hang on to it if you can. No, we held on to that, but we basically spent the next, the next like month or two kind of trying to figure out how we could do it. And then basically 7 months of just preparing to leave.
Yeah.
Okay. That's amazing. Like that's really quick to go from having every excuse in the book to I'm out the door. So that's amazing. I definitely want to hear more about that, but I know I need to hit this question before I forget, because my wife asked it specifically. She wanted to know, when you started traveling, what were your goals for yourself and your children? Did you have any?
Yeah, that's a great question.
One of my main goals, I think, was to see the world with my kids. I mean, I grew up in a family that liked to take vacations, and so I wanted to be able to provide that for my family too. And I think I had always had this like grand idea of traveling around the world, you know, backpacking around the world. And so,
well, you also were born in another country, and then was in the Peace Corps for 2 years. That's so you had a lot of travel in your past.
Yeah. So I wanted to be able to share that with my kids too, and Clint. And so that was my main goal.
Yeah, I think I guess I had a couple goals. One for myself. One was I just had to break out of the kind of rut of what we were in, like hour and a half commutes and staying in an office for 9 hours, and it was burning me out a lot. So I think I just had a goal of like, let's do something kind of adventurous, daring, or whatever, different, and just see where it goes.
Yeah.
I think for our kids, I don't know if we had a huge goal, or me personally had a huge goal for them, other than really wanted to just expose them to other cultures.
Yep.
That really is still a family value of ours, that is very strong, is that we just want to make sure that like we kind of normalize difference to them in a lot of ways, and not in a ignoring kind of way, but in a like fully accepting and fully acknowledging that everyone lives all sorts of different lives.
Yeah, and that there's no like one right way to live.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. I love that. I love that. Are you guys familiar with the concept of third culture kids?
Oh yeah, that's me.
Yeah, I figured. Yeah, we were introduced to that probably a couple years ago, and we just grabbed hold. We were like, that is what we want. I know for us, we were in Germany for about 3 years with our daughter, and there was just seeing her interact with other people from other cultures is so different from America. And, you know, just like that fear of talking to strangers just didn't seem to exist when we were gone, you know, when we were abroad. And seeing the way she interacted across language barriers was just amazing. And I thought it was just such a wonderful thing for her that I couldn't wait. Now that we have second, you know, we wanted to get both of them out, and she's getting older, so she'll start remembering things. Our daughter's 8 right now, or 9, sorry. But yeah, so I think it's wonderful that you're doing that with your kids. And I think we had similar goals, and people I've talked to have had, you know, similar answers to that. They all feel that way about, you know, embracing cultures and embracing that difference, you know, that we're similar amidst our differences, you know, and I think that's a big thing. Now, getting prepared for you guys. So you said it was like 7 to 9 months, right? What did you do? So just walk us through quickly from, you know, you had to get rid of your job, right? You had to quit your jobs and then start into something else, and we'll have to talk about that. But like, what did you do?
Well,
he didn't quit his job. He kept working.
I kept working. I basically just asked I had already kind of been working mostly from home anyways. I just go in the office a couple days a week by that point. And so I just basically asked my manager one time, I was like, hey, can I just leave and not come into the office at all? And he was actually totally cool with it. I ended up having to meet a couple executives in the IT department and stuff, and our company was spread throughout the US. So on business trips, I ended up meeting with different people just to kind of get the clearance, because it was a little bit unprecedented in the company I was in. Now, of course, fast forward, 4 years, it's not unprecedented for any company practically. So, but at the time, it was definitely, I was kind of a guinea pig in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
But we laugh because every time we get asked this question, one of the kind of geeky things that we laugh about is that we both kind of have a project management mindset. So we we downloaded a project app management tool app, basically. We created stories. If anyone's familiar with the agile process, we created stories, did stand-ups, basically.
Yeah, I had like a whole, I think I had like a Gantt chart of like, okay, these are the tasks we need to do, and this is when we need to do them by, and that with like deadlines, and then each, I don't know if it was every day to check in and be like, okay, have we done this task so far? Okay, have we completed this? Do we need to move the deadline for this task to, you know, like a few months or whatever? Yeah, it was a lot of, I think, I mentioned it in the other interview, but we have like, you know, our project management brain really honed in on like the tasks. But I think that one part we didn't really spend as much time in was just talking through like what travel would mean for us emotionally and all that stuff.
Yeah, we actually, late in our planning process, we met up with another family here in Seattle that was about to do the same thing. And we were talking about that, and they were asking, well, what did you do to prepare? And we said something along the lines of what we just said. And they're like, wow, we haven't done any of that. They like pointed to this like little paper list that they had on their wall. And we're like, and it was like, well, what have you guys done to prepare? And they were talking about all this emotional preparation that they were doing. And we're like, oh, we haven't done that at all. Yeah. So we started doing a little bit of that kind of later.
Like, you know, talking about like what our values are, why we want to do this. And it's definitely a work in progress. So one advice I would say for all families is like tackle both. Instead of like one or the other.
Yeah, for sure. But and there was also like that project. I mean, there were so many logistics. I'm glad we actually broke it down into kind of a vertical, like different compartments of things to do, because we had to prep the house, we had to purge a lot of stuff. I mean, we basically had, you know, like most people had our entire lives in our like in storage or in our house, etc. And so purging that down to a reasonable size to be able to travel with and put a little bit in storage.
And then like unenrolling our kids from school, putting together a will, figuring out how we're going to do our like mail and things like that. Banking. The
school thing was a big one because our kids were always in public school, so we had never homeschooled before. So that was the thing we had to kind of brush up on and learn about and learn the logistics and requirements. And so that was, so it would end up being a lot of different things that we had to tackle in all sorts of areas.
Well, here's a great opportunity for a shameless plug. I mean, I think you have a how-to book on how to do that, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So I have my ebook is called Hey Kids, Let's Travel, and Let's Go Travel. And it's essentially a how-to guide for how to do a family gap year. And there's a chapter that goes through like all of those steps that we've done with like a checklist, so that, you know, families can make sure that they're covering all those little details that might get lost. And I do put in like questions to talk about like the emotional aspects too.
That is great, especially for me, because I know we're in Mexico right now, but I told you in my last interview, you know, we're going fully nomadic either probably end of next year or mid next year. So we're going through all those steps right now, purging and getting everything ready. And I'm going to have to definitely read your book and review it and follow all those steps. Otherwise, I'm going to be watching these interviews over and over and over. But yeah, so yeah, that I'll make sure to include that link down below. And if any of you watching are interested, check out Story Unfolding. I have an interview where we talk all about the book. So it's really cool. But yeah, so getting more into your planning, budgeting. I know you mentioned something about that in a written interview portion with me, Astrid, where you're talking about, you know, some of the expectations you guys had going into, you know, traveling as a family, and how you had kind of a rude awakening to it and had to kind of adjust. So could you tell us a little bit about that?
Oh yeah. So I think we had the expectation that travel would be a lot cheaper than living, and in many ways it was, but it wasn't as cheap or inexpensive as we expected. And so when we traveled, I quit my job and he went half time. And so we essentially like went down to, a third of what our income was, but the travel costs weren't, a third of that. Like it didn't decrease correspondingly. And so we ended up going, putting a lot of money on our credit card. And so we had to essentially course correct and figure out like, okay, so what is this, like, how are we traveling that's making it so expensive? Are there things that we can, behaviors that we can change? And then also, like, are there other sources of income that we can find so that we can travel and we can continue to travel and yeah.
Yeah, and part of it was like that initial time period was the novelty of it, right? It was kind of the honeymoon period, so to speak.
Right.
And it was like, so we were just excited to be in some of these places. So we weren't really being as cautious as we were later about lodging costs or about excursions or even eating out regularly. All that stuff we were just kind of wrapped up oh, this is exciting.
And when are we ever going to come back here again? Let's take advantage of everything as much as we can.
Yeah, and we were going specifically to countries that have a lower cost of living in general. And so we were just thinking that it would all magically add up, and it didn't, or it added up in the reverse way we thought it was going to.
Yeah. But, in terms of budgeting, like, I've done the same thing that I had before when we were more stationary. So I check our budget, or I track our expenses, every week, or and just make sure that we're not overspending. But then at the same time, like, I was telling myself, oh, well, I'm sure it'll even out, like, once we go to this and this country, and then it wouldn't. And so we had to kind of change our both, like I said, both change our behavior, and also, like, I ended up working again and finding a remote job, which helped to bring some additional income.
The good outcome of that story is we increased our debt on our credit cards that first year and a half. We course corrected, got better about what we were viewing, and are in a much better position now than we were then. So we were able to course correct. So we still hold, I think, the idea that living in the United States is very difficult mostly for cost of living reasons, and for a lot of other reasons. And that's still one of the things, and we know we've talked to so many other families in Facebook groups or in person or whatever that are either doing this or want to travel full time. And a large part of it is they want to do it because of financial reason. We still believe you have to go into it a lot more aware than we did, and I think a lot of people do.
Definitely.
For that to kind of pan out in your way.
I think it's really important to do, like, research on, like, the actual costs in those countries instead of taking other people's word.
And and I'll just say one more thing because it might lead into something else. There is an exploitative part that we want to try to avoid as well, that we're starting to see become kind of a sad trend, I think, in the full-time travel community, and we did it too to an extent too, is that becomes your only focus, and then you're going specifically to places or to cultures that have lower cost of living and really kind of exploiting those things, and that kind of goes into, like, our responsible, sustainable travel kind of mindset, where that stuff is, we're trying to be more aware of that kind of stuff.
We definitely want to be mindful of, like, taking part in the gentrification of different countries, essentially.
For sure.
That's a great segue. So a couple things that just hit me. I'm like, so I think those new travelers have to really feel that transition from vacation mode to living And I think a lot of people don't understand that. And I know we are going through those trials and tribulations as well, because when we were in Germany, so my wife and I were in the military. So we were living there. We were in Europe for 3 years, but our travels were more along the lines of like, you know, weekends and vacation, you know, going away. So now it's a whole lot different. And, you know, we're here in Mexico and we're like, hey, lower cost of living and all that. But if you aren't careful about it, those eating out adds up, even if it's cheaper. That starts to add up. And then, you know, all that stuff, you're like, oh, it's only a couple pesos. And then you look at your bank account and all of a sudden it's like, how many times have I taken money out of the ATM? Yeah. So, I mean, I think you need to make sure you don't get in those ruts. You need to be mindful of that, you know, that just because you're going to somewhere that has a lower cost of living doesn't mean you're not going to be spending a lot. So I think you guys hit on that expertly. But I think a great way to segue into, you know, why I really wanted to have you guys here was that responsible travel. And thank you, Clint, for bringing that up. I agree with you, you know, that it is in kind of an exploitive, you know, component that's in travel and tourism overall. And I think something that we have found is we're very much on the, you know, we want to help people volunteer. We want to help people and volunteer by giving back to local communities, not going on these big volunteer excursions and the volunteerism industry that we kind of have some, you know, negative views on. But we want to help people actually, you know, give back to these communities that they travel in and understand that wherever we go, whatever we do, we have an impact, and it's up to us to choose whether it's positive or negative. And we're going to have an impact, even if we're ambivalent and, you know, we just go without thinking about it. It's going to be an impact whether we want it or not. So we have that choice. But something I found is, you know, before we started traveling as a family, we really, you know, this is something we're very passionate about. We write about, we research about, we talk about it. And then you add in the kids component, right? So we have kids with diapers and trying to, you know, limit waste. And then here in Mexico, we don't have a washer right now. So we're having to hand wash everything. And in America, we are using, you know, cloth diapers, but here it's really hard to do that. So like, how did you guys find that balance as a family traveling, wanting to be responsible? And did you find any, you know, good tips that you could share?
It's a great question.
Oh, geez. I mean, I think you have to kind of give yourself a little bit of grace as a parent. Like, you know, that, like you're saying, you know, we have these ideals of like, I'm only going to use, you know, sustainable products, but then you've got like a kid who needs, you know, something at this very moment, and the only thing available is this disposable object. Okay, well, fine, we'll make that exception. But I think a lot of, for us, we try and model responsible behaviors as much as possible, so that the kids sort of like absorb that. And like, we do little things like we carry with us tote bags, so that when we go to the grocery store, we're not using the plastic. We've got like our own like foldable little tote bags that we can use, or carry these like silicone freezer bags, so that we can reuse that with us, or we can use that instead of like Ziploc bags, or we have like, you know, metal straws that I'm very adamant about out of instead of the regular straws.
The produce bags. We have
the produce bags,
mesh
like,
produce bags for when we go to the grocery store. Yeah.
So at least in the like the environmental aspect, it's just trying to find as many like little things that you can to replace or to use that isn't going to like cause a big disruption in behavior for your kids.
Yeah, and so I like that you mentioned, because you do cloth diapers and you find you're maybe worried about that transition, or you're just finding it harder. We end up trading off some things too. Right. So because we needed to find that balance and we couldn't do everything. So for example, in the Seattle area where we're from, they have a great composting, like citywide composting is really, really, really nice here. And just largely we couldn't compost at all practically anywhere we lived, because we stayed mostly in cities, and we stayed in the heart of cities, and just the idea of composting is just completely out the window in most of those cases. And so basically, we traded off for kind of minimizing our plastic impact. Because one of the things we noticed, especially traveling through Southeast Asia, I think, is just the amount of plastic that we use, and we personally use as a family, like single-use plastic. So one of the things that we really started focusing on was, okay, Mexico, it's easy because you go to like a restaurant or something and everything's like in glass jar or glass bottles or things like that. So that's nice. But like when you go to the convenience store, you go anywhere, like trying to not get things that are in plastic if possible. Trying to seek out those markets. Again, Mexico, especially Oaxaca, is amazing because there's some produce markets and things that are absolutely amazing to go to that doesn't have anything single. So we tried to find things like that where we were like, okay, single-use plastics, let's try to reduce that as much as possible. Let's be conscious about water usage. That's one thing that really hit home while we were traveling. And then I think the last thing is like, so we're kind of a little less nomadic these days because of some just some changes in our lives. And so we're going to be back in the States for a little while. And one of the things we wanted to bring back with us that we've really latched onto was, being conscious of our water consumption, because that was one thing I noticed, especially when we were in Mexico, just how precious water and potable water especially is, and just the access of it and how we take it for granted. I always tease like I kind of stand on my soapbox a little bit, but like in the States, I'm like, we flush potable water. Like that's a frustrating thing for me. That here in the States, we flush potable water. So, like, I think bringing that stuff back home, some of those ideas and things too, is important as well.
I want to add too, because traveling responsibly is more than just like being environmentally, aware and stuff, but it's also like the cultural and the learning and understanding your economic impact. And those are things that you can do with your kids that are a lot easier to do. Like, learning about the culture, you can go to a museum, you can take classes, you can, find a locally owned tour company to help to guide you through the cities and stuff. So those are things that we did with our kids to help them like just be more aware of the culture that we're in wherever we end up in the world. And then in terms of like, being more economically responsible, or just like more supporting like the local economy was something that was big for us. So we would always try and find like, locally owned restaurants in Mexico would usually be like, the taquerias or, like
the markets of the
and
street.
Then in Indonesia, it was always like, the street food vendors, and we would, go over there and watch them like make the food and kind of ask questions like, oh, what is this? What goes into here? So that helps the kids get like interested in it. And I think later on, then they will have like, they're kind of more primed to be more culturally aware of things.
Yeah,
I think that's wonderful. Yeah, I love that. And I want to keep talking to you guys, but I think we're running a little short on time. So I think I'm going to have you back on because I have a burning question that I want to ask you that it's a moral dilemma that we've been having with the whole concept of negotiating prices here in Mexico and that impact on gentrification. So I don't think we have time to talk about it now. So I'm going to have to have you guys back on. But I will.
That's a good one. We got a lot to say about it too. So
I would love to have that, and I would love, maybe I can have you on. I'll do a written interview with you guys and write a blog about you or something. But I want to have those discussions with you. So before we cut it out for today, is there any last kind of advice or tips that you would give maybe new families wanting to get out there? And are you guys going out anytime soon? I know you said you're going to be back for a while, but
yeah. That's I'll address the last part first because that part's easy. So we're going to be based in the States mostly, probably for this next year, and then we're going to go back to vacation mode, kind of where we're going on small vacations. Probably Mexico a couple times, And then the idea is that sometime next year, then we'll go back to more of a nomadic style, but we're going to probably do home base, where we keep our home in Seattle and go out for maybe a few months and then come back. So we're kind of exploring that route. And then as far as your advice one,
I think just start small. You know, you don't have to like jump into a huge, big around the world trip if you're not ready for it. Like choose a place that's like a little closer to home, maybe, or like instead of going for a year, try it out for like a week or something, or 2 weeks, so that you kind of dip your toes in the water, so to speak.
Yeah, for me, I would say, I mean, just kind of on the traveling side is be ambitious, but flexible and forgiving. Meaning, like, be ambitious in your planning. Don't be safe. Don't, you know, kind of challenge yourself a little bit. If there's something you want to try or you want to go to a market, I know like the markets in Mexico are one of our favorite things in the world. The first time we walked in, Oaxaca especially, yes. But first walking in there when we didn't know much Spanish at the time, can be overwhelming. It can be super overwhelming. And so like challenge yourself, be ambitious, go do those, but also be flexible. The first time we realized we needed to be flexible, or the first time that we realized this is okay, as far as being flexible and kind of cutting back from your ambitious plans, is we were in Puerto Escondido, Mexico, and it was absolutely gorgeous. We were literally a kilometer away from the beach, and we're like, we're not leaving our apartment today. Like we've done too many things. We're exhausted. We're here for the whole month. We're just gonna be chill, and we're not leaving the apartment. We have food. We don't have to leave. And I think that was a major revelation for us, was like, yeah, the downtime can be just as important as anything else that you do.
Yeah.
As far as your emotional health, yeah, physical, all that. Yeah. And then I do want to just say something about the advice for like kind of environmentally or cultural awareness, is that in the travel world especially, it's really easy to ignore cultural stuff, cultural, whether it's issues or whether it's things that are happening locally. I love just kind of chatting with other people when I can speak the language, or reading the newspaper or something like that. But like, I think at least just be aware of what's happening locally. When we were in Oaxaca, there was several protests that were happening in the center park square, the Zocalo there, and it was, a lot of it was centered around women's rights and indigenous rights, and specifically there. So I think like just being aware and being open to being aware can go a long ways to kind of just living more responsibly in those while you're traveling. And environmentally too, like we don't like volunteerism. I mean, we'll just say that right now. But like what we do like doing is finding local volunteer groups that are planning volunteer activities, because they're the ones that know, like they're the ones that know what's needed in that moment or what they're planning on doing, and small scale volunteer efforts. Like that's what we like to do, because that's A, you're meeting local people, which is great, and B, like you're doing something that local people feel passionate about or needs done, and that's
that's what we're all about too. Like tomorrow we're going for our last and final trip to dog rescue that local woman runs here in Oaxaca, and the wild dogs, you know, or the just stray dogs are a big problem here. I'm sure you remember, you know, so they do that to help local community. So I think that's a huge deal, and that's what we're about too. So I think we have that in common. But we're definitely at the very end right now. So where can we find you? Where can everyone find you guys?
You can find our travel stories on thewanderingdaughter.com, and then on Instagram at wanderdaughter.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
I just tag on to where we find you. So.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys for coming, and I can't wait to have you again. It's been truly a pleasure. And for all of you listening, make sure you check out Astrid's book. All the links will be down below. Click subscribe if you liked the interview today. And don't forget to travel mindfully.